Hello friends and welcome to StudyIQ. I am Joycey Joy and today in this lecture we will discuss about the link between jobs, farming, that is agriculture, and climate. So we will be discussing about this in detail, and let us first see what is the current affair that is related to the link between jobs, that is employment, farming, and climate. So in the recent UN Climate Change Summit, which was held in the year 2019 September, a teenager named Greta Thunberg, so she addressed the United Nations Climate Change Summit, and this address of this young lady, the teenager, had made a wider impact regarding climate change. So the Indian government is at present all bothered about the slowdown in the economy and not much bothered about the climate change. But here in this lecture we will be looking at how the climate change has impacted the global slowdown, economic slowdown, especially in India. So what is the role of climate change in economic slowdown, and what is the link between employment, farming, and climate change? So this is what we will be looking at in this lecture. So let us start with what are the worries, or what should be the worries of the Indian government, or for what we should be worried of. First of all, the fact that we need to understand is that the government at present is highly concerned about the economic growth slowdown. Now, what is meant by economic growth slowdown? Economic growth slowdown means a slowdown in the GDP growth rates. Now, what is GDP? GDP is actually the monetary value of all final goods and services produced in an economy. So, we can say that economic growth slowdown is all about a slowdown in the output or a decrease in the output. So this is meant by economic growth slowdown. So growth in an economy is measured in terms of output, and which is called the GDP. So GDP is actually the output of final goods and services in an economy. So this is what is called the GDP, and economic growth slowdown in India means there is an output slowdown. Now, the Indian government's desire is to give a boost to the Indian economy. The government somehow wants to increase the production, increase the output, and also increase the demand. And when we see the government actions regarding growth slowdown, we see that the government is completely or to a larger extent ignoring the biggest factor of climate change. How the climate change has caused this economic slowdown. So this is what the government has not addressed completely. Now, when we talk about economic growth, the industrial growth around the world is driven by one factor, that is called consumption. So consumption is what creates demand in the economy, and based on the demand, the economy will produce output or supply output. So what we must understand is that economic growth or increase in the economic growth rates is coupled with another very important factor, that is mindless consumption. When the consumption habit of the population increases, this will generate aggregate demand in the economy. So this aggregate demand has to be met. So this will be met by supply. Now this is how it is. This is the demand curve, which is a downward sloping curve. So the market has to meet its equilibrium, that is the supply and the demand should increase. So this is a supply curve and this is the equilibrium point. Now what will happen when the demand increases? When the demand increases, there will be upward shift for the demand curve. So what will happen? The demand curve will move upwards. So now as a result of it, what will happen? The supply will increase. In order to meet the increased demand, the supply has to be increased. And when supply increases, the output increases, which is measured in terms of GDP, and thereby we say that there is higher economic growth in the economy. Now, industrial growth or economic growth happens when there is increased demand or increased consumption. To meet this increased demand, the supply or the output also increases, and this causes climate change. So this increased or mindless consumption is a very important factor which causes climate change around the world. Now when we compare the income levels in India, the income levels in India are still low, very low in fact, for a majority of the population, that there should be some economic growth in the economy. So the problem here is that there should be some amount of economic growth, but higher demand or higher consumption will lead to increased impact of climate change. So there should be a balance for both of this. So the real concern of the government should be to meet its objectives of economic growth without hampering much the climate or the ecological conditions of the country. Now let us come to rural unemployment. Let us see what is the status of rural unemployment in India. First, let us see the periodic labor force survey report of 2017-18 year. So according to the periodic labor force survey report, there is a dramatic rise in the unemployment rate since 2011-12. So the unemployment rates, especially the rural unemployment rates, has dramatically increased, significantly increased. Now, under the periodic labor force survey, there are various categories of employees or various classification for employees. Now, one classification is urban female. So, except this, that is the urban female, in all other categories, in all other classification, there has been an estimated fall in the employment rates, or the unemployment rates have increased. Now, when it comes to rural men, in case of rural men, the unemployment rate is almost 4 times the average of 40 years up to 2011-12. So, the unemployment has drastically increased in case of rural men. So, the report of the periodic labor force survey shows that there is a very immediate requirement to do something. Policies and plans should be focused towards this on generating employment, also addressing the issue of unemployment in the country. Now let us come to the government response to slowing growth or the economic slowdown. The government has announced various measures to tackle the present economic slowdown, which is triggered by lesser consumption or lesser demand in the economy, and also because of lack of investments in the economy. Government has announced a set of measures to address all of these. So first one and the most important announcement of the government is to reduce the corporate taxes. So the corporate tax rates are proposed to be reduced. So this is one very important measure, and the tax cut is meant to be a remedy for the stagnant corporate investment. So what will happen when the corporate taxes come down? The profit margins of the corporates will increase, and by increasing the profit margins, they will invest more money in the economy, and by undertaking investment, what will happen? The productive capacity will increase. So by increasing investments, productive capacity will increase. This means output of the economy will increase, and by increasing the output, this will generate more employment in the economy. So this is the target of the government. But when we come to the root of the problem, what we understand is that it is not because the corporates does not have profits or even enough profit margins or enough capital to make investments. The real problem is that they are not making investments. So what the government should ideally do here is to increase the investment, should undertake public investment, government investment, thereby help in generating employment. Now, when we talk about corporate sales, a large part of the corporate sales is driven by rural demand. So, we know that Indian economy is basically agrarian in nature. More than 50% of its population is directly involved in agriculture and allied activities. So, a majority of the demand in Indian economy arises from rural demand. So, the corporate sales, a major portion of the corporate sales derives from the rural economy. And now, what impacts the rural demand? Rural demand is triggered by the income levels of the rural people. If the income levels falls, there will be lesser rural demand. Now, in any case, when the income level increases, this will increase the aggregate demand in the economy. Suppose you have more income, you will demand more. You have lesser income, you have lesser purchasing power, you will demand less. So, this is a basic logic. So, here you must understand that the rural demand can be triggered only by increasing the rural income. And for that, what should happen? The farmers, the rural population should realize best prices for their produce, and also their production should increase. But what impacts production? Indian agriculture, it is highly dependent on monsoon. Less than 40% of Indian agriculture uses irrigation, except a majority uses monsoon rainfall for meeting its farming requirements, its agricultural requirements. So what is required is to increase the production. For that, climate change plays a very, very important role. Now let us come to production in agriculture economy or rural economy. Let us talk about the production decline. Why there is a production decline in the economy? The first reason is the crop agriculture. There is no growth in the crop agriculture. This is mainly because Indian agriculture is dependent on monsoon. Sometimes the monsoon is good, sometimes the monsoon is not good. So when the monsoon is good, what will happen? There will be good harvest. But some years there is bad monsoon, then what will happen? The harvest will decline. So in good monsoon years, the harvest will increase and the harvest will decline in bad monsoon years. So what the farmers will basically do, whenever they get good production, good harvest, they will use the excess money to repay the debt that they incurred during bad monsoons or bad climate impacts or years of natural disasters. So this is what happens. So this implies that the consumption in the rural India, in the rural economy, does not appreciably increase. Now other reasons are low export growth, the state of banking sector, the finance availability of the agricultural sector is also very less. Even though there are schemes like priority sector lending, Kisan credit cards, etc., these all require collateral, which most of the farmers do not have. In India, most of the farmers are marginal farmers, small farmers. Their assets are very less. So based on assets only, KCC or Kisan credit cards will provide them credits. Also priority sector lending, they require collateral. Some farmers are tenants or they cultivate on some other land owners' crops. So these are all some drawbacks. So they do not have enough or adequate access to finance and capital. So these are all some reasons why farmers are not able to make much investment and therefore the production does not increase. As we said, a majority of Indian economy is dependent on agriculture, even though the GDP contribution is comparatively lesser. But the poor agricultural performance, especially the production, is responsible for a fall in the domestic demand. This is because a majority of the domestic demand falls from the rural economy. So when the income levels of rural economy declines, the demand from rural economy also declines. So this is one reason. Unstable agricultural production. It has got other ramifications as well. First of all, the unstable production or decline in production will lower the demand for agricultural labor. So income levels will decline. Subsequently, the supply will increase. Thereby, there will be an increase in the prices, inflation in the market. Thirdly, the output levels will decrease. Thereby, the GDP will decline. So these are all some of the effects. Now, what are the long-term solutions in this regard? First one is to increase the agricultural production. For that, we need to adopt strategies like mechanized agriculture and other farming methods that will yield maximum produce for the farmers. So, with maximum produce, the supply in the market will increase, the employment rates will increase. This is because more people will get employment when the output increases. The exports from agricultural sector will increase. Thereby, the income levels of the farmers will increase. So, when the rural economy gets more income, the rural demand will increase. Thereby, the output and the supply will also increase in order to meet the demand. Thereby, the GDP will increase. Now, secondly, the ecological factors must be considered very seriously. Now, for example, variations in annual rainfall, variations in the quantum of monsoon that we receive. In some places, we have flood-like situation. In some places, we have drought-like situation. Also, the monsoon get delayed in certain parts of the country. So, monsoon-dependent agriculture is hugely impacted due to these ecological factors. The agricultural practices, the economic activities should be in line with the sustainable development. That means without harming the environment, considering the needs of the future generation as well. Now, thirdly, a deeper adaptation is required to deal with these factors. For example, the governance, the intelligent governance, the resource allocation, the resource deployment should be done in a better planned manner, the farmer behavior, for example, the excess use of fertilizers, etc. So the farmer behavior should all be properly regulated. And for that, the government, the policy makers should also pay due attention. You can find the PDF of this lecture on our website www.studyiq.com. You can also follow my Facebook page for more video updates. You can write to me at joycey.studyiq@gmail.com for any of your queries and clarification. Thank you.